He discovered that his medical profession lost its mind and its soul over one experimental shot. Welcome to Freedom Alive. Dr. James Thorp is one of the few doctors in maternal fetal medicine who publicly protested the COVID shots as directly deadly to his unborn baby patients. And Dr. Thorp witnessed the carnage firsthand, documented it, published papers, and then they threatened his license. Dr. Thorp joins us to share more of the shocking data that they've tried to keep hidden, even still today. I'm thankful to be joined again by my friend and co-host, Matt Staver from Liberty Counsel. And Matt, when we think that the COVID shot nightmare has ended, more information continues to be revealed.
Well, the restrictions are gone right now, but the consequences of the COVID shot and the lies from the government and from Big Pharma and from the medical industry are continuing. And unfortunately, there are people that are no longer with us because they lost their lives because of this COVID nonsense that was hidden, that ultimately took their lives. And or they actually have some medical consequence. Like, one of the main well-known guitarists can't play the guitar anymore because he took the COVID shot and he can't even hold a pick anymore because of the COVID consequences from these shots. Dr. James Thorp is one of those individuals that stood up and spoke about the truth during COVID, and he was threatened with his license. So many people in the medical profession they repeated the mantra of Big Pharma, and they repeated the mantra of the established medical societies that they were a part of. They were afraid. They didn't speak out. They didn't think outside of their box.
I fully agree. We cannot wait to bring this episode to you. But first, Liberty Counsel's Freedom Alert is next.
Gender mutilation business grows at taxpayer expense. According to a report from the American Principles Project, the gender mutilation surgery market was worth more than $4 billion in 2022 and is projected to grow annually by 8% through 2030. The total cost of full gender mutilation procedures can be anywhere from more than $87,000 for males and up to $600,000 for females. Since gender interventions create lifetime repeat customers, the medical organizations that dominate the market have a significant financial incentive to promote them. Medical organizations also can expect to bring in thousands of dollars annually per patient for puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones. American taxpayer dollars should not be used to harm and irreversibly mutilate children. All federal funding to medical organizations for this must be stopped.
Up next, Matt's interview with Dr. James Thorp.
I'm pleased to welcome to Freedom Alive a very special guest, Dr. James Thorp, who is a board-certified OBGYN and maternal fetal medicine specialist. He has more than 250 publications and is on the board of directors for the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine, has a book called Sacrifice: How the Deadliest Vaccine in History Targeted the Most Vulnerable. Welcome to Freedom Alive, Dr. Thorp.
Thank you so much for having me on, Max.
Dr. Thorp, you were one of the few, by the way, that spoke up during COVID with regards to the carnage that was happening to the patients and the people that you treat, these unborn children and their mothers. Take us back to the COVID timeframe. What did you begin to see? Why did you begin to speak up when so many others did not? And where are we today?
Yeah, simple story. I was in 2020 and 2019 and late 2019 and 2020 as the pandemic was being drummed up. Of course, I saw in October of 2019, I saw the broadcast Event 201, which I think you probably are well aware of.
Yes.
And really, it was a scenario that broadcast exactly what was going to happen. But in 2020, when the cases of COVID-19 actually came down, then I began treating with a medication that I was very comfortable with using, that I had researched. It's called hydroxychloroquine, HCQ. And hydroxychloroquine, of course, was well known to me because many physicians have used it for the last 3 or 4 decades. Hydroxychloroquine was a medication that was used for women of reproductive age and really all people that had an autoimmune disease. And so it was an anti-inflammatory and it worked very well. Also, it was used in 2004 for SARS-CoV-1 infection, and it was highly effective. So this was my go-to drug among other, a variety of other treatments. So when I started prescribing hydroxychloroquine, I was attacked, I was censored, I was refused by the pharmaceutical, the pharmacists, local pharmacies that I called these medications into, refused to fill them. And then I knew something was very odd. In May of 2020, then that article came out in the Lancet alleging that he had accumulated 96,000 patients with COVID-19, multinational study, and that it was ineffective and dangerous. Well, I knew that was false. It was completely false. It was completely fabricated, because as a researcher and publishing extensively, I knew that would have been impossible to accomplish. So I immediately became concerned that this was a staged event. And in fact, I was right when later in the year, when the Lancet was contacted and requested by several experts to look at the data, they refused. So they retracted the article in October of 2020. So this data was completely fabricated. The reason why they attacked me and many others who tried to use hydroxychloroquine was because it was effective and because the plan was to roll out the vaccine and by emergency use authorization. And it would have been illegal to invoke the EUA for the COVID-19 vaccines if there were other effective therapies, of which there were. There were many. So then I became aware that, okay, they're going to roll this out regardless of what any other studies show.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We did have off-label medications and nutraceuticals, certainly, that could be and have been used to effectively treat COVID. And the fact that we had those would be contraindicated to having an emergency use authorization for an experimental vaccine. And so they wanted to get the vaccine. So in order to do that, they had to lie that there was no currently available, effective, and safe treatment. And that was so devastating to people around the world because we had good treatment. We didn't need this experimental mRNA shot. But when the mRNA shot did come out in December of 2020, the first one with Pfizer, and then you had Moderna and Johnson & Johnson in early 2021, what did you begin to see with regards to your patients and within your specialty of OBGYN and maternal fetal care?
Yes. Well, to be clear, I didn't see any problems at all during 2020 with pregnancy and pregnancy outcomes, nothing. And all the devastation and carnage that I saw in my preborn, my pregnant women, began after initiation of the COVID-19 vaccine. And just as an aside, back to the other issue of the EUA and hydroxychloroquine, by the way, as you well know, they did the exact same thing with ivermectin, right? So I saw devastating, very heavy vaginal bleeding in women who were not pregnant And by the way, not just women of reproductive age, but women, young women prior to menarche, menstrual periods, and older women, postmenopausal women. Very, very heavy abnormal bleeding. And that event was well documented on some large groups that assembled on social media, and those were all shut down. So then I saw significant difficulty in getting pregnant. Obviously, the women that did get pregnant and took the shot, it was devastating. It was not just with my own clinical eyes seeing a massive increase, huge increase in miscarriage, late miscarriage, fetal death, complications during pregnancy, which were devastating, blood clot, thromboembolism, seizure, severe growth restriction of the preborn, placental abnormalities, placental separation, severe early premature labor, premature rupture of membranes, what we call cervical insufficiency, where there's either a very late miscarriage, 16, 17, 18, 19 weeks, or premature labor. The cervix would shorten, open up, soften, infection of the membranes, fetal cardiac abnormalities, fetal malformations of every organ system. After birth, a substantial increase in newborn death and newborn transfer to the neonatal intensive care unit. It was devastating in 2021 and 2022.
So we had COVID in 2020, and we didn't have any of these experimental shots until the middle of December of 2020. But you didn't see that as a result of COVID itself. But then when these shots come on the market, mid-December 2020, and then January, February of 2021, now all of a sudden you see a difference. We had COVID in 2020, we had COVID in 2021. The only difference is the introduction of these experimental mRNA shots that are being administered to people, including pregnant women.
That's exactly right. And by the way, we've been talking about my observations at that time. I was currently at that time employed by SSM Health, one of the largest Catholic healthcare systems in the United States of America. And I was probably one of the most busy and most experienced maternal fetal medicine specialists, in the country, especially in that system. I think in that 4.5-year duration I was employed by SSM Health, I saw 27,500 patients. So I really did have my fingertips on the pulse of outcomes. But just as important, I extensively published looking at Pfizer's data and off of the government's own CDC, FDA database. And I started, I was the first one, to my knowledge, to publish 8 months after the COVID-19 vaccine was being pushed in pregnancy. So we're looking in late 2021. I looked at the data, and there was catastrophic pregnancy outcome according to the government's own database, consistent with everything that I saw with my own eyes. Now, the reason I did that was because the 3 organizations that had really done a complete flip-flop 180, ironically, in the duration of a human gestation. So they were pushing the shot. And they sent out a letter to 62,000 OBGYN physicians on September 27th, 2021, stating that you will follow the HHS mandates, you will push the vaccine in pregnancy, If you do not, we will destroy your career. We will take away all your medical licenses and all your board certifications. Now, these three organizations had honored me my entire career. I was on the board of directors of the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine. I was a board examiner for the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And they themselves threatened me and, in essence, told me to shut up or I would lose my license and my certification. And I knew these individuals. They were senior like I was, and I knew them because I had published and worked with them on the board as an examiner. No, you're not going to do that, and we'll see about that. So that's what stimulated me to actually look at the data, and I published an open letter from James A. Thorp, MD, to the American Board of Obstetrics and Gynecology. That was a irrefutable collection of data that was published in January of 2022. It was published online for the whole world to see. It went viral, and I've never heard from them since.
Dr. Thorp, this is what really is astounding. I think COVID, the whole experience that we went through, caused certainly me and everyone else that I know of to really re-examine medicine, vaccines, the advice that we get from our physicians, because the medical institutions, the hierarchy, betrayed the American trust. People like you that were following the science, the real science, were then threatened with silence and censorship, revocation of these hard-earned board certifications that you rightly deserved. How does something like that happen, and where do we go to reform that system so we don't ever see this happen again?
Well, this is a great question because it continues to happen. And the medical freedom fighters, many of whom, Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Kelly Victory, Dr. Drew Pinsky, these are all very close friends of mine. They're actually on the same medical board that I'm on, and we interact regularly. Even Mary Talley Bowden from Houston, just yes, the Reuters and the New York Times did a hit piece on her. This is still going on. This is what a totalitarian, fascist, communist state does, and it's very concerning. As a disabled veteran who signed up to put my life on the line for this country, this is betrayal. I liken it. I don't know if you personally have watched the miniseries, 5 series on Chernobyl that occurred in April of 1986, the Chernobyl disaster.
So where are we with the COVID situation? I know we're not out of the woods because we have residuals still happening from COVID. We have turbo cancers. We have so many other things happening. We have, I think it's Eric Clapton who can't play the guitar anymore because he got the COVID shot. He can't even use a pick because he's neurologically disabled from the COVID shot. One of the greatest guitar players in the world can't play the guitar now. So where are we with regards to this issue from COVID, but also the childhood vaccines, and what does the future look like with regards to the field of medicine and true science?
In my opinion, it looks very bleak. From the very top levels of our government, the pharmaceutical companies are given the green light. Freedom fighters, medical freedom fighters like yourself, like many physicians, are continued, as evidenced by Mary Talley Bowden just yesterday with her ex-post. She's being voraciously attacked by the major news outlets. The organizations are continuing to push COVID-19 vaccines in pregnant women.
Yeah.
In my book, Sacrifice, how the deadliest vaccine in history targeted the most vulnerable. It's still going on, and read the book. The data is there. My testimony and my data, that studies that I've published in peer-reviewed medical journals is irrefutable. Yes, it's being suppressed, but there's not a good outlook, because I think at the very top level, including President Trump, has made the decision that we're going to march forward. His guardian, Susan Wiles, is essentially directing everything. She has completely castrated Kennedy, wiped out the entire ACIP committee, wiped out all the changes and progress that we've made with the childhood vaccine schedule. And Max, you are right with one thing. There is a bright cloud to this. The American people now, by and large, a huge percentage, know the government is lying, their doctors are lying, the organizations are lying. How can I say that? Very easily. Look at the COVID-19 vaccine uptake. It's a pathetic single-digit percentage. So the American people know, but they also know that they can't talk about it or they will be shunned, mocked, censored, gaslit.
Yeah, I know. I'm very sad to see that the ACIP task force there for childhood vaccines has been disbanded. I know Dr. Robert Malone, who's been on our program, a friend of ours and a friend of yours, you obviously know him as a medical colleague, has had some very negative things to say. He served on that particular committee, and basically they weren't listened to. They weren't treated well. And that is part of some place within the administration. I'm sure RFK would want that, because certainly he has stood for science, particularly in the area of vaccines. But now it's disbanded. I don't know what the future is. Do you know what the future is for the childhood vaccine schedules?
They're going to march on, because money and power is more important than the health of our children. We've just published a landmark study, many of them, but Sally Clark is a lead author. And interestingly, she obtained access. This is published in a peer-reviewed medical journal. And she had access to the data in the Philippines, all of the national data. I can tell you that the COVID-19 vaccine and the childhood vaccines in the Philippines irrefutably caused harm. The same thing that we've seen in the United States of America. And I think you're very familiar with Del Bigtree and his movie and his exposure of the Henry Ford Hospital. Marcus Zarbos, I believe, the lead author, admitted on camera, they had the data, vaccinated children versus unvaccinated children, a decade of data. It was irrefutable. Those children who were not vaccinated fared much better than those children that were vaccinated in terms of multiple different diseases attributed to the childhood vaccine schedule. And by the way, in the countries that have relaxed that schedule, meaning they've delayed, they've reduced the number, those children do much better. The vaccines are poison in pregnancy. No vaccine should ever be given to a pregnant woman. And by the way, you're not talking to an anti-vaxxer. You're talking to a veteran, a disabled veteran, who extensively published, extensive clinical experience, that was a vaccine pusher in the 90s, okay? And I did a metanoia because I looked at the data. So I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but the American people have opened up their eyes.
I hate that idea of an anti-vaxxer. That's just a terminology. It's like a straw man, so to speak. People use that to shut down debate. If you follow the science and you don't think that this particular vaccine is helpful, in fact, it's harmful, then now you're an anti-vaxxer. No, you're following the science. As you said, they had the science for a decade. They knew, but they have legal liability immunity. So they can make all the vaccines they want to. They can put them on the list for the different states. You can force them on the children to go to school. And then when somebody gets injured or dies, there's no legal liability for these pharmaceutical companies. That goes back to the 1980s. That needs to change. They need to be held accountable. Dr. Thorp, thank you so much for joining us. Your book, I encourage people to read. You showed it there, but the name of it is Sacrifice: How the Deadliest Vaccine in History Targeted the Most Vulnerable. And you have a website, Dr. James Thorp. It's Dr. James Thorp, drjamesthorp.com, drjamesthorp or drjamesthorp.com. Dr. Thorp, thank you for joining us on Freedom Alive, and thank you for your courageous voice to follow truth and follow the science.
Thanks for having me on your platform, Max. God bless you.
Thank you.
Matt, I really loved the point that you and Dr. Thorp made. The COVID experience made us, and I know my family and I have been exactly like this, where we have been forced to re-examine everything from a medical perspective. And our trust is...
you're really forced to examine it because your trust is broken. You know, we grew up with all kinds of narrative from the federal government and the state governments and big pharma about vaccines in general. And you just did them because that's what the narrative was. And any kind of opposing viewpoint, that was crushed. It was crushed because it was detrimental to their profit-making business. And that became very clear during COVID, especially when you had hydroxychloroquine, HCQ, you had ivermectin, you had other drugs that could be used off-label, anti-parasitic drugs and so forth, and you had nutraceuticals, vitamins and supplements that were very effective, like vitamin D. I mean, how many people heard about vitamin D other than you have to go out into the sun, get vitamin D before COVID? And you know, all of that was ways to treat COVID, and they were very effective. And that was the problem, because if you have an effective treatment that's already on the market that can be used for COVID, then you can't rush out an experimental vaccine.
As much as this lies behind us, it really remains in front of us. It really does. And there's so much happening. Let's pray every day that that God will help us see the truth, act on it, and be met with a different outcome than has been the case up to this point. In closing, remember 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, which says, "Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You were bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies." Our freedom is a gift from our Creator. We must never forget that and always protect it. Join us next time, where you'll hear victories as well as ways you can stand up for your priceless freedom. Join us again for Freedom Alive.